Welcome to Big Questions. This is Cal Fussman, an old school guy telling you where the world is headed. One of the reasons I can do that is the man you're going to meet in a moment, Ozan Ozkural. I always say, nobody flies like Ozan. Wait until you hear him describe his last 30 days. Ozan jets around the world as the founder of Tanto Capital, making deals, advising boards of directors, governments, and investors, meeting kings, presidents, and financial leaders. In doing so, he sees geopolitics and global finance the way few others can because he's talking to so many influential people on the ground in so many diverse places. I met him 10 years ago when he was interviewed by my pal Larry King, the CNN broadcast legend, in Los Angeles. Afterward, Larry and I invited him to stop by our daily breakfast table, and he blended in so well with the gang, he became a regular whenever he was in town. That table was a curious crowd, and it's not hard to see why Ozan was such a hit. There are few people who can casually talk about quantum computing, what happened to the Medici family during the Renaissance, and what the population of China is going to be 75 years from now, and how that's going to affect you. I can go on and on about Ozan's resume. Born in Turkey, lives in London, started his banking career with Merrill Lynch, served on the Foreign Policy Leadership Council of the Brookings Institution, became a regular lecturer at the University of Cambridge Judge Business School. To do his resume any sense of justice, I'd be talking for another 10 minutes. But let me boil this down to a simple sentence. When you have a meal with Ozan, you leave the table knowing something that just about everybody else you're going to meet that day doesn't. Not long ago, I was on stage with Ozan at a crew event where he brought up the K economy. It's not often referenced on the news, and I quickly realized that if you don't understand the K economy, it's going to be very difficult to understand where the world's headed. So he's going to tell you all about it. Thanks to my sponsor, Moments by Luxury Concierge Travel, for bringing this podcast to you. Moments allows companies to reward their employees for extraordinary work with trips around the world prepared by the highly complimented, white-gloved concierge desk. Let me tell you, these trips are unforgettable and cherished. I wonder where Ozan would want to go. Ozan! I'm in Ozan traffic control here, trying to catch up with you. Where have you been in the last 30 days?
Well, Cal, even by my standards, it's been quite an intense 30 days. I started out in Istanbul, then London, then Austin, Houston, when you and I met, and then went to Uzbekistan, then to India, in Mumbai, Delhi, Chandigarh, to Thailand. Last week I was in the UAE, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and 2 days ago I came to Ankara for the NATO summit and just arrived in Istanbul. So, even for me, it's been quite a ride.
Were you traveling almost every day, or did you get to spend some time in any of these places?
No, I did actually. It wasn't. Look, I think I had taken 8 flights, 9 flights, which is quite intense. But thankfully, I do get to spend time, and I have gotten to spend time to try to get the sense of the place, in addition to just doing business and having meetings, right? So it was a very fruitful, very eye-opening month.
Well, maybe that could lead into my big question of the week. Can you explain to me what the K-shaped economy means?
Let me have a stab. Look, K-shaped economy. What does it really mean? We go through, and we have gone through historically, always boom and bust cycles, right? But in some cases, at the recovery point of a bust going into a boom, some people recover much faster than others who may not recover at all. So you have a K. The upper end of the K are the people that thrive, and the bottom end of the K are people that actually go back and don't thrive. And that's why you have, kind of a K-shaped. It's interesting you asked that question because in my travels this month, particularly in a place like India, which is a fascinating, very important place for the world, this was evident. Especially in Delhi. So, quick recap. Mumbai is the financial capital and Delhi is the capital, right? But there is New Delhi, which was set up when the Brits basically went into India, and then there is the Old Delhi. Now, I went at my government meetings, business meetings, what have you, and then we had a very good tour guide, VJ. And VJ looked at me and said, Mr. Oskral, you look like the kind of guy that wouldn't mind seeing a bit of chaos. And I said, well, that's very intriguing. Okay, show me the chaos, right? And he kind of looked at me and said, okay, I think you'll do fine. So Lina and I, we went next day to have a tour of the Old Delhi. And I got to tell you, I've been to some really chaotic places, but this one takes the cake. But it's not just the chaos. Yeah, people think of chaos as a bad thing, but in the case of Delhi, in the case of India, it's a part of life. It's complexity more than chaos, and people are getting by at the same time in the same place in the same city, not too far away. There's a phenomenal growth story. I mean, big roads, eloquent, a lot of international people, quite kind of European almost, not quite, but quite kind of Western. And in Old Delhi, we have a lot of history, a lot of heritage. And the beauty of this, Cal, is that I think what makes India quite special in this case is that these two things, not just can they coexist, but they complement each other. So it's a very interesting place where you see the two sides of decay, but actually the two sides of decay are working just fine. That's not so easy for other places to have that kind of a symbiotic balance.
So it's working out fine for the people on the bottom arm of the K?
Look, it's when you look at it from the outset, of course, the people that are on the bottom half of the K are not having as great a time, of course, as the top part. But what I thought was fascinating in this case is that, they get along. I mean, they have a life. You went to different shops, we spoke to different people. It is chaotic, but there is order in that chaos. And that's what India does so well. And it was an eye-opening experience to kind of see these two separate universes exist at the same time. And again, not in very, very distant places, in the very same city. Fascinating stuff.
You mentioned order in the chaos. What does that mean?
What that means is that, when we think of chaos, what do we think? A lack of order, right? I mean, people are going around, there is no framework. But in this case, order in chaos is that within the chaos, there is an order. Within the chaos, there is a cadence, a rhythm. And people that are living in that chaos can also go out to the other side and then come back in and then go out to the other side. And they exist symbiotically, which is a very important thing to have from a social perspective, right? Because the way the world is going, Cal, and we discuss this with you all the time, back and forth in our meetings, in our speeches, the amount of change that we all have to absorb is so consequential and it's coming at us so fast, so hard that at this point in time, we are witnessing at the back of the pandemic a K-shaped economy, but I think that we are facing a K-shaped evolution of the human species.
How does that play out?
Look, no one knows yet, right? But let's take a step back and understand what's going on. And this is not just a financial or a fiscal issue. This is very much socio-economic, geopolitical, technological. Now, where we are right now, and yes, change has always happened and humanity has always adapted. Obviously, we are here and Darwinian mechanisms have always prevailed, and I'm sure they will prevail again. But we never had to digest so much change so quickly at such a consequential manner. So think about this. So for those people and companies and countries that can remain on their A game, so stay ahead of the curve when it comes to innovation, when it comes to financial power, when it comes to protection, physical protection is an important part. That Homo sapien group is going to, can expect to live up to 120, 25, by the way, healthily. Access to technologies that's going to make life much more productive. And if they can protect themselves from what's going to prevail around them geographically, you know, in 25, 50, most certainly 100 years' time, the human being that emerges that's at the upper end of decay is going to look very different to those that haven't been able to get on that fast-paced evolution train. So I think that is what we're witnessing.
So there's going to be a bifurcation in the species by this way of thinking.
That's right. By the way, this is not news. This has always happened. And in fact, this reminds me of the book *Sapiens*, right? I mean, when I read this book, the one thing that struck me when I first read it was I always thought that human evolution had been linear, but it has not been. You know, sapiens and Neanderthals have lived together, coexisted for 50,000 years. And then at the end of 50,000 years, sapiens prevailed. But in this case, maybe it's going to take 50 or 100 years. That's why I think we are evolving at the speed of light. And that K-shaped economy has the potential to morph into a K-shaped evolution, which is going to bring, opportunities aside, a lot of challenges, social challenges at most.
All right, this brings up two questions to mind. I was just speaking at my alma mater, University of Missouri, journalism schools there, and I was speaking to a group of young scholars from high school, and I was somewhat surprised by what a lot of them were telling me when I met them in classrooms where they were studying and meeting. I was asking them how they felt about AI, because I've heard of speakers at commencement addresses going up and getting booed just by mentioning the words AI, or by saying this is the next step into the greatest industrial future that we can imagine. And many of them were basically telling me, I don't want any part of it. I don't use it. And now these students were very smart. And I wondered if part of the reason was they didn't want to take part in this because it allowed people who weren't as smart as they are to click a button and put out beautiful work that they didn't really do, while these scholars are working it on their own.
Well, look, that's an interesting point. Now, I'm not so sure if I agree with that analysis of why they're booing. Look, I've been lecturing at universities for the past 10 years, top universities at that. And I can tell you something. Even at the Ivy League university, at the MBA, PhD level, before the pandemic, most of these cohort of students didn't really have any material life concerns. I mean, maybe individually, but not really in any kind of material thematic way. Believe me, right now, every single one of them, without fail, are anxious about what the future holds, are anxious as to whether they're going to have gainful employment, are anxious to try to understand whether their line of study will mean anything going forward. So I think there is a lot of natural anxiety baked into this level of change, and AI is just, by the way, what we're talking about right now. Side note, we're going to be talking a lot more about quantum computing, a lot more about agentic AI, quantum and robotics integration in the next decade, but let's park that for a moment. I think the anxiety, Cal, in fact, I know that the anxiety is not about change. It's whether the change is going to be equitable, which is always a concern. And historically speaking, let's go back, and I love giving this example because we, unfortunately, as species, we don't really learn lessons of the past, which is why perhaps the history, even if it doesn't repeat, rhymes quite a bit, right? And we love to talk about the Renaissance era. Oh, this is the Renaissance era, for this is the second Renaissance. Well, guess what? Let's take a look and understand what happened in the first Renaissance, right? Loosely defined as a period between 1450, 1550. Even the Medici family in Italy were kicked out of Italy, kicked out of the city, books being burned by people to say, you know what, it's your Renaissance, not mine, not equitable. And imagine, they didn't even have Instagram back then, right? So it is very normal to have this anxiety to think that, am I going to be at the top part of the K or the bottom part? even if people don't articulate it in such manner, in heart of hearts, that's what they're feeling. So I'm not surprised. But, to not use AI is not an option. It's the fastest way to get extinct.
This is what I was trying to explain, that, and this is why I was asking about the K-shaped economy, because I want to be able to explain it more clearly when I'm meeting somebody at that age.
No, what I was going to say is that next time you meet someone that is having a conversation with you about this, and I get this a lot, I'm sure you get this a lot as well, right? The one thing maybe you can share with them, perhaps, and I will share this with all of our listeners, and I really believe this, especially those young people. I often get a question, okay, fine, well, if this is all happening, then what am I supposed to do? Which career am I supposed to choose? And I always say the same thing. It's less so what career you choose, but it's a paradigm shift in thinking that you always have to reinvent yourself, invest in yourself, and just get used to the fact that change is going to become more rapid. The beautiful thing is that if your frame of mind is designed towards doing something about it, there's going to be plenty of opportunities. But if you think that, hey, getting a job is a sure thing and I'm going to retire, forget about it. The retirement concept is not going to exist. It already has started. But if you have the agility, the frame of mind to always reinvent yourself, you know what? It's quite an exciting time that we're going to witness. So I would say that to those young people that come and ask those questions.
That's where I try to take them to the word adaptability. And I know that there probably aren't many college courses called Adaptability 101 or 201 or 301, but that's what people need in a time where everything is changing so fast, to be able to just go with it and be able to learn quickly. Here's another part. Here's a great example of that, because it shows what people at the bottom of the K can do very quickly. On my podcast last week, we had a visionary in Time Magazine. His name is Byron Garrett. He's the CEO of Genesis Works. And this is a nonprofit organization that takes high school students in underserved areas and teaches them the mechanics of working at a corporation along with technology and AI, and then sets them up with internships at big companies like Target, JP Morgan Chase. And they go off for the summer and get a salary that often is more than what one or both of their parents are making. And it changes their life. And so you can see how in basically less than a year, somebody's life at the bottom of the K can be radically changed and lifted to the top of the K.
That's right.
And this is something that I think everybody who runs around with these doomsday scenarios, or there are going to be no jobs left, we're all going to be replaced by robots, and
they have to understand at the same time, this is going to bring, I mean, let's not dilute the issue as well. I mean, if you have this frame of mind, it's beautiful. If you don't, again, it's going to be challenging. The problem I think that we're going to have to witness and handle, okay, is that no nation state is quite ready to handle the amount of disruption that's going to come our way. And we are having to go through this at a point in time in history where, geopolitically speaking, we are at a bipolar world that's going to become more multipolar, but center of gravity is really US versus China. We always talk about this. But this is important in the context of this is exactly the time where countries ideally should be coming together, and in an area as important as AI, quantum, robotics, what have you, should actually work to govern the society together, because we are all going to have to deal with this. You can't just carve out US versus China versus Turkey versus somewhere else, right? But the problem is, and again, opportunities, yes. And I look at the problems from a policymaker's perspective. No politician that I know, and I know a fair few across the aisle, quite is ready to handle this. Now, I'll throw some numbers that I heard at a conference. Actually, I was at the Milken conference in LA, as you know, about a month back. And this was a closed conversation, so I won't name who said it, but it was someone that is very, very well known in the AI space globally, very senior guy. And these guys have access to the sandbox of next chat GPT, Anthropic, all the models, right? And funny, we're talking about, hey, what's going to happen to the world? Like, the multilateralism that was the byproduct of the liberal world order at the end of World War II is gone. Oh, what comes next and all that kind of stuff. And this guy basically came and said, hey guys, you know what? We have bigger problems. Oh, really? So would you care to expand? And then he said, yes, let me tell you something. So we think, it's a part of a council, AI council, that agentic AI is going to become reality somewhere in 2028. That, from a corporate planning perspective, is tomorrow, okay? And he said, within a year of agentic AI becoming available, that we are forecasting up to 30% job losses in the world across different areas. Now, this is not a negligible number. Now, the opportunity part, I'm fully behind, as I said, okay? From a policymaker's perspective, from a government's perspective, this is a nightmare. Because what do? Universal basic income won't cut it. Even universal high income won't be enough because, hey, we're all human. We all want to do something with our lives. So all I'm saying is that the change is really kind of coming and governments are not ready for it. So what worries me is not that opportunities don't exist. That's why, what your guest last week has done and is doing is remarkable and it's very important because this kind of takes the change from someone at the upper band of the K and basically gives access to people in the lower part of the K. And for those people that want to use it, you know what? Great. In fact, that is a microcosm of the American dream, right? US exceptionalism. If you work hard enough, if you take risks, nice things can happen to you. And so that's not going to change, right? So to your point, in one way, it's great for the people that are at the bottom part of the K. And let's also face something, we don't choose how or who we get born into. So sometimes demographically, the world is that it's not really equal. But so those people that find themselves at the bottom part of the K will also have mobility opportunities. But again, governments, I think that's going to be where the pain point is.
You started the conversation describing your experiences in Delhi. How might what we just talked about, where you saw people in underdeveloped areas getting a chance and in a very short time learning the skills to take them from the bottom of the K to the top of the K, is it plausible to think that all of humanity can be reinvented that way, or are we back to the past that you were also describing, where there are basically going to be two forms of human?
Look, I don't think it's plausible. I mean, I would love to think that we're all going to get enlightened and, kind of a bright utopic future will present itself. I mean, I would love to be proven wrong. I don't think that is going to happen. I think what will happen is exactly what has happened since our species, occupied this world: evolution. So, but how does evolution work? It is Darwinian. It is the survival of the fittest. Also, in this case, I think, at least I take this lesson to myself, I think having curiosity is going to be an asset. Curiosity about what comes next, curiosity about how we can do things better, because that curiosity is now going to be matched with access. So the beautiful thing about all of this is that in previous kind of eras, and you don't have to go too far, let's go to the 19th century, right? Even, which is nothing in the context of human history. If you were born into the wrong demographic group, it was highly unlikely that you could get yourself out of it. Now is not the case. And it's not going to be the case going forward. So I don't think we're going to evolve in a homogeneous kind of way. That's not how evolution works, but we don't have to. I see the positive in all of this. And again, but with the positive comes that inequality, that counterbalance that needs to be found. And all of this, by the way, is happening at a time where we have left the old world order, and now we are transitioning into whatever comes next, and we are in this transition phase. So there's multiple things going on at the same time.
All right, here's a geopolitical question. If If you're in the United States and you're feeling like you're at the top of the K, if you're in China and you're feeling you're at the top of the K, what's there to fight about? You're both at the top of the K.
That's a great question. That's a great question. So basically, what you're asking is, why can't just we get along, right? Is that it? Like, why can't we just get along? Well, geopolitically speaking, Cal, geopolitically speaking, it's not really possible for US and China to see eye to eye. Two very different ways of approaching the world. Now, normally it doesn't have to be adversarial, but there's so much at stake over here. US is the current superpower, and China is one as well, by the way. But at the same time, China has caught up. Now, especially when it comes to matters of national security, especially when it comes to matters around quantum computing, which is worth talking about it, maybe some other podcast or a little bit here. The amount of power that either state will get is so significantly far and above anything that we know right now. You can imagine that the amount of distrust that exists is significant. In fact, we had this conversation in that same lunch at the Milken conference. This is the reason why we can't, or they can't, sit and decide to do this together. Because whoever cracks quantum computing first will have access to a logarithmic exponential increase in compute that basically means everything becomes hackable. Because don't forget, our lives right now are drive-by-wire, fly-by-wire. Everything is actually, in a digital ecosystem, pretty much. So in that case, that's a phenomenal uptick in power, and we're just not there. So that's the reason why people just can't relax and say, hey, you know what, let's just have this run its course. At the same time, interesting numbers for our viewers over here that may be interested in even the longer term kind of elements of this. Demographically, the world is going to look very, very different by the end of this century. And that's only 75 or so years, which is, again, not that much. If you think about the fact that 75 years ago, it was at the end of World War II, and then a few years later, right? Let me ask you this question. Right now, the population of China is about 1.4 billion. What do you think it's going to be by 2100?
Well, because I hang around with you, I know what the answer is, and I don't want to sound like I'm like I would know it without Ozan. So why don't you tell him?
Do you remember the number?
I believe it was about 800,000.
No, not 800,000. It's
No,
600.
800 million. I'm sorry.
It's not that bad, right? But no, it's 633 million. Okay, so these are the UN forecasts. So 1.4 billion, 633 million. So since I remember you kind of rewind my speech. So China, 1.4 billion, 633 million in 75 years. Japan, 120 now, 77 by that time. South Korea, 52, 22. Okay, crazy shifts. African continent, 1.4 billion now, 1.5 billion now, 4.5 billion in the same time. But there's also a lot of thematic changes that one has to try to understand, to try to make sense of what's coming. Now, what will be interesting with all of this light speed evolution and stuff like that, normally when you have a demographic issue, an aging population, declining population, you also face a decline in productivity. This time, though, because of AI, quantum robotics, so the physical applications of AI will also be very, very important. That productivity gap is going to be filled. So maybe, and by the way, again, the same forecasts tell us that we're going to reach peak world population by 2080, about 10.5 billion people, and then start to decline. So the question really is, or rather the point is, given enough time, things will sort themselves, no problem. In fact, we may end up getting to that utopic world you just described. It's just a transition phase. We have to be careful about how we transition from here to there. And that's why politicians and politics and policy is important. That's why, in my mind at least, it's important for young people and business people to try to get involved in policymaking, because we need to craft a system that will take us there.
Well, it makes me realize that the race to get to the next big phase is so crucial that nobody can basically bow out or say they just can't lose. If you lose, it's like you lose everything.
Well, the stakes are high. And again, having just come from the NATO meetings, NATO summit just now, it's interesting that for the first time in a long time, I witnessed policymakers, especially within the NATO framework, which is very kind of US, Europe, Turkey driven, right? The Europeans, which are really not going to have a good time right now, by the way, kind of having woken up to the fact that they need to act. Because don't forget that the whole premise of the EU, as great it has been since the end of World War II, is again so bureaucratic and not nimble, and is designed to resist change. So, even they are looking to try to move forward, because I think people now acknowledge the fact that if they don't, I mean, standing still is not an option. Okay. So I think we're going to see a lot of things change. And, we may have some volatility. We are going to have some complexity for sure. I'm just curious. And let me ask you a question. What do you think? What do you think we're going to be talking about this time next year?
I have no idea. I really don't, because I didn't imagine we'd be talking about what the K-shaped evolution is going to do to the world. I know it's been around. It came about like during the pandemic, but I never thought that I'd find myself in a room with a bunch of 16-year-olds who seem to be behaving like 70-year-olds and me thinking like a 16-year-old. I could not have thought of that in a million years. Now I realize it's not every 16-year-old, but there is like a pushback coming from people who are anxious.
And why do you think the pushback is? What are they pushing back on in your experience? What are they pushing back on?
They're pushing back on a couple of things. One, entry-level jobs are being eliminated. Everybody can see that.
Okay.
And so where do you start? Well, obviously, listening to you, you'd say it starts with being adaptable and being able to use these new tools and look to see how you can create the opening for yourself. Anybody who is thinking in that old world way of, I want to get started with a company, and 50 years from now, I'm going to get my watch and my retirement. It's just a different time frame.
And do you actually see these young people looking for instant gratification? I think you see social media plays a big role over here, since social media is designed to give us that dopamine hit whenever we like something or someone likes our photo. I think it is in my hemisphere, a lot of these young people, I mean, they want the trippings of success, but are not necessarily ready or not really knowledgeable about what it takes to get there. So they just want it now. Possibly because also it's very difficult to dream right now. I mean, that K-shaped, the really bad part of it is that asset prices have gone up through the roof. So if you are not being able to get yourself on that asset price bubble, or rather asset price growth, then you're increasingly feeling like you can't get there anyway. And that feeling of helplessness and lack of hope is a very dangerous place to be. And I do think that a bunch of the younger part of the population are just saying, you know what, I will never be able to get a home. So I want success now. And I don't mind taking risk. So I want it immediately. And social media, because no one ever puts their worst life on social media. It's always people having a great time and always people showing what they have, which is not the reality anyway. Right. But again, I think they get attracted by the fact that they want it all and they want it now. Is that what you're witnessing? Like, do you get that sense when you're talking to them?
I did not get that sense. Again, a lot of these students were 16 and 17 years old, so they were still trying to figure out a way. But I'm just noticing the pushback. Why would you have an executive from Google get up on stage? I think it was at Stanford, and getting booed. Like, generally, when you're graduating from a place like that, you're thinking, "Wow, that'd be a good place to work." And it's not one place. There's an energy here, which I can understand it. I don't deny that they have the right to feel that way. If they speak of it in environmental terms, how much water is this going to use up? What is this going to mean for our long-term sustainability? Okay, let's have that conversation. And then not only that, if you're thinking that way now, you are primed to be one of the people who can do just what you said. Get in the conversation somehow and make a life of helping to determine those outcomes. There's definitely jobs there.
It definitely is. I think perhaps by this time next year, amongst all of the geopolitical stuff that we're going to be talking about, we'll be talking more about the ethics of AI and how to really govern. Let me give you that one final example, conscious of our time. Now, this goes back into 2017, so almost 9 years ago, 9 and a change years ago, actually. So when I was in Davos World Economic Forum, and I'm a futurist. Like, I love concepts like singularity and transhumanism and all that kind of stuff. And I'm a sci-fi buff myself as well. So I love these things. And I was walking in, I have a meeting, going to a meeting, and then I saw this panel with the title, The Transhuman Code. I said, okay, this is interesting. I think it's transhumanism. Let me just go and see what they're talking about. Actually, it was 5 scientists, top scientists in the world. And they were at pains to try to talk to the people in the room to say, hey, we better right now, right at this moment, write a constitution of what it is to be human. So define what a human being is. Let's define it now, because if we don't define it, the chances are that we're going to just try to muddle through, try to wing it. And what comes next in a generation, not too long, one generation is not going to resemble anyone in this room. And that was 9 years ago. And we haven't done that, have we? So we have basically just, and we haven't done that because we are always driven by short-term compensation cycles, short-term KPI. We are a short-term focused species, which is why whoever comes to govern, whoever comes to do politics, smart ones, okay, new ones, will have to take this into account. The world is full of politicians, not enough leaders. So this is why we need true leadership to help us guide to what comes next. But I do think that I just want to share the story with you because I always remember this. Again, transition. And we haven't done that job. And I think, I don't know, if ethics of AI will definitely be an important point next year, but I still think it's not too late. So I hope we end up getting ahead of the curve. And maybe the reason why these kids are booing a Google executive is not because of what AI is going to do, but what they think they are not doing.
This is a question I'm going to go deeper into. And obviously, it doesn't represent every 16-year-old. And the interesting thing about this, and maybe it's a good place to just ask you the question, and we can take it to another podcast for another time. I've been wondering now about kids who are 7 years old and going on AI. To them, that is their natural world. That is who they were born in a partnership with. And so that person is going to be very different on your evolutionary scale than some of the people now who are like 19 or 20 and got in on it a little late and maybe never felt completely comfortable with it or felt a little behind and are seeing some of the drawbacks. Just that difference in 10 years, you're going to probably be seeing a different type of human who is kind of born at the top of the K, even in an underdeveloped area. Because if they can get some access to it, they are a different person.
I mean, that's the interesting one. I agree with most of what you said. I don't agree with some of what you said. Most of it, what I agree is that, look, this is why change is the only constant. Because you see, you and I, or that 17-year-old kid in this case, will have the context within which to decide this is good, this is bad, this is better, this is worse, right? But then people being born into the technology, obviously, that's their life. So they're not going to be saying, yeah, then you sound old. Now, again, why am I saying this? I agree with you in that I think that's what's going to happen, which is exactly why it's up to us right now. It's up to the politicians, policymakers, what have you, right now, to truly get out of their comfort zone a little bit, get out of trying to muddle through election, midterm a little bit, and really give it some thought into what a framework of humanity should look like. By the way, this is a significant responsibility, okay? A significant responsibility to try to have an authority on what a human being should look like, should live like, should, what rules they should live by. The problem is, if we don't do that, this is going to repeat itself. It's going to be AI 7 years old, quantum computing 3 years old, robotics, whatever, right? So now, is it a bad thing? One could argue, well, this is always how it works. Don't be such a, kind of a negative person. But the reality is, it's just trying to help our species survive this transition. It's not about what's good or bad. It's about survival. Because if we don't do something about this, what comes next may end up threatening our survival, which is why it's a very, for world leaders right now. And yes, every single human being thought that they were the most important generation since everything, okay? But this time, really, it is a consequential set of leaders that have the responsibility to try to draw a framework of what comes next and how. And so that part, I agree with you that 7-year-old is going to think is normal. What I don't agree with you on is that just because they have access to AI, that they're going to be at the top part of the K. Because you see, everything is relative. Because as the K, it's not that simple, right? I mean, there are some barriers to entry. So because people at the top part of the K are going to continue to evolve at a different speed. Okay, so your base case may be higher than a 7-year-old that was born into a same demographic 25 years ago, but the competition is way out of the curve. So I don't agree with that, but I agree with the gist of the concept.
Okay. Well, I was thinking of it as not the kid who's just going to click one key and ask AI to do all the work. I was thinking of it in terms of what you're talking about before, that adaptable person who comes from the bottom part of the K, but now can position themselves to be in the top part and move forward. It's really, this is a great conversation, and it's a great conversation starter. I think we should pick up in the next conversation with exactly where you just left it. What do we need to do to sit down as if we were in that room that you blindly walked into like a decade ago and thought, oh man, this is deep. We ought to be doing something about this, and we've stayed in the shallow water ever since. So maybe we'll go deep next week, and let's see where it takes us.
Sounds good to me, Cal. And I promise that I will not be traveling as heavily as I have done so for the past 30 days.
I wouldn't count on that, Ozan. You always tell me that.
I have a horrible carbon footprint, my friend. So It's I for one just can't wait until they invent teleportation and I don't have to take a plane.
Well, until then, I'll be following you as closely as I can. Thank you for all the wisdom, and we'll be back soon.
Take care, my friend.
That brings us to an intriguing question. If Ozan was rewarded for great work with a moment's trip, where would he want to go? What destination would a guy who's been everywhere choose, knowing that the white-gloved concierge staff would come up with an experience that's unforgettable? Which leads to another question. Where would you want to go? When you look at some of these photos, what strikes you? The beautiful beaches, mountain adventure, a safari, a peaceful retreat. Who would you want to take on such a trip? Your spouse? Your kids? The entire family? Friends? What kind of work would you like to do to be rewarded with such a trip? As for Ozan, I think his answer might catch you off guard. But it kind of makes sense. It's a long way from business deals and work. Ozan said he'd like to go to the South Pole. Hey, Moments, has anyone ever asked for that one before?